County Board of Supervisors to order, please, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing because following the Pledge of Allegiance will be a moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
indivisible,
under God,
with liberty and justice for all.
justice for all.
Thank you. We'll have the reading of the notice, please.
The adjourned organizational meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse, Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, Wausau, on Tuesday, October 20th at 7 p.m., and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. I'd like to request everyone put your phones and/or other electronic devices on silent or vibrate as to not interrupt the meeting, and also request any of the visitors on the WebEx to put your phones on mute or your electronic devices on mute. And we will proceed to roll call, please.
Beestrom.
Here.
Bizotto.
Here.
Boots.
Here.
Book.
Here.
Butke.
Here.
Christensen.
Here.
Seiler.
Here.
Conway. Drabeck.
Here.
Weifrick. Fisher. Gaber.
Here.
Gibbs.
Here.
Gonnering.
Here. Here.
Guild. Gums. Harris.
Here.
Jacobson.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Krause. Lamont. Longenhan.
Here.
Leahy.
Here.
Lowe.
Here.
Mask. McEwen.
Here.
Oberbeck.
Here.
Opal. Robinson.
Here.
Rosenberg. Schley.
Here.
Seefelt.
Here.
Soibert. Stark.
Here.
Van Cray.
Here.
Vole. Zhang.
Here.
Weifrick. Fisher. Guild.
Here.
Gums. Lamont. Mask.
Here.
Opal. Thank you.
Here.
Oh, got him.
Thank you. And I would like to welcome all of the visitors that we have with us this evening, along with our viewing audience. And we will move on to item B, presentation and reports. We have an update on Marathon County COVID-19 situation. Joan Toyer, and I would request Supervisor Robinson has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Chair of the Board of Health, I want to express my appreciation to the work that Joan and her staff have done in dealing with the pandemic. They've been challenged throughout the year to address both the coordination of the community response, education of the public, and contact tracing. And they've done a very good job at it. I also want to express my appreciation for first-line healthcare providers and others that have helped address this this pandemic, which is really making its presence known in central Wisconsin, both on a personal and community-wide basis. These are challenging times where we need to pull together and work together, wear masks, and make sure that we follow the CDC guidelines. And again, Joan and her staff have done a tremendous job, and she's been briefing both the Board of Health and the Health and Human Services Committee on a regular basis. And I'd like to turn it over to her to give an overview of where we are in terms of the pandemic in the county.
Good evening, everybody, and it's great to see those of you who I can see on my screen. Back in March, actually on March 19th, I met with the county board to share what Marathon County as well as the health department's role was in our response. And 8 months later, throughout this time,
Joan, your computer is cutting out. If you can hear me, your computer is cutting in and out, and it's showing low bandwidth.
you can't.
Now you're back, Joan. Now we can see
Okay. Okay, not sure what's happening here. Okay.
you. Snow's
Not
getting
had
in the way.
problems in the past. The snow, I'm on top of the mountain here, so I should have great, great connection, actually. So anyway, I was just sharing that I've been providing weekly situational reports since the beginning of April. And it's my way of keeping you informed, our fellow department heads and their staff, as well as our partners, our healthcare providers, as well as our legislators, informed on what is happening here in Marathon County, what's happening nationally at a state level, as well as then what are the activities we're carrying out in our response. So I appreciate John as Chair of the Board of Health ensuring that you all receive that update. And then a new feature as of October 12th, I've been relaying the community message I've been putting in my email with the report and posting that on our website as well, realizing that some people benefit from having that personal touch. In addition, we have a COVID-19 webpage as well as Facebook that we are keeping up to date on a daily basis as a way to communicate with the public and ensuring that they have the latest, most accurate information being relayed from the Department of Health Services as well as CDC. So tonight I wanted to give everybody the opportunity to reconnect, to reground us in terms of what our response goals are and our strategies and the tools we have, and to be here to field any questions you may have. And just appreciate the support I, along with our department, has received and will continue to need to receive in the next 6 to potentially next 12 months here in our response. So looking at what is today's reality, 8 months in our response, our first case actually was reported the evening of March 19th when I met with you last. We now have 3,531 cases, 188 hospitalizations, and 38 deaths. And if you've been watching local news in the last couple of weeks, you will have heard the plea from our area hospitals in terms of the impact this is having on them as well. For those of you who are into numbers, 70% of our cases now have occurred in the past 30 days. And so I think it just speaks to the surge that we have been seeing in the last month and been experiencing. And last week we averaged 121 cases per day. So when you think about just the volume of cases coming in, the amount of testing, and then if you're looking at 5 to 6% of all our cases end up in the hospital, you can see how those numbers start piling up and impacting our systems. So our response goals are the same as what they were back in March. It is really, we want to minimize the impact on people's lives in terms of their economic well-being. Now that we are back in the heart of school, we want to ensure that children can experience in-person learning. We want to also ensure that children and adults, how can we reduce the impact in terms of hospitalization as well as deaths. And the new goal we face right now is, how do we gain control of this? The virus is widespread in our county and it's out of control. And so we need to take control of this virus if we want to meet our established goals from back last spring. So how are we doing that? We have some basic measures. The first one is called mitigation, which here in Wisconsin, we are somewhat limited in terms of what that looks like, given our current conditions and landscape. Right now, we do have 2 state orders. One is around masking, asking people to mask, as well as limiting indoor public gatherings. Because Marathon County, we currently do not have a communicable disease ordinance, we are somewhat limited in terms of enforcement, and our primary goal for both of those orders is to inform the public as to the benefits in carrying those things out. The second tool we have is called harm reduction, and it's really about informing the public, our schools, our businesses, and other organizations what actions they can take to protect themselves, their workers, and their customers. And the fourth tool we have available is community testing. And we've been fortunate in the past 3 to 4 weeks, we've been involved in working with the state of Wisconsin and the National Guard, whereby now the National Guard is actually situated in communities across Wisconsin. And we are fortunate we now have a weekly National Guard event on Tuesdays, and it's being held on West Street with the assistance of Phil Rettmeister, the emergency manager. And the reason why we have the National Guard dedicated here 1 day a week is to help our healthcare systems deal with the surge in the need for testing. And our fourth tool that we have is called contact tracing, and that's really working with the individual who has been identified positive, helping them identify who their close contacts are. And the unfortunate thing is, in light of the significant number of cases, we now have had to move to the state's crisis standards, which is basically asking individuals to make their own contacts to their close contacts and giving them the tools to explain what individuals need to do. We are prioritizing close contacts in terms of childcare settings, our schools, as well as our long-term care facilities, and then business outbreaks as we're able. And the last strategy that we've been carrying out is working closely with our healthcare partners. They are a key partner in our response, and been connected with them since we've experienced the surge in the last several weeks. I'm part of a daily call where they are connecting just to review what their capacity is in terms of beds, staffing, testing, and the ability to transfer individuals who need long-term care support systems. So the tools I just walked through are the tools that we have today. They are the same tools we had in the beginning. And I know that today on the media call, somebody asked our secretary, what are some additional tools we have? And I would say, like she did, we have no new tools. These are the tools we have. So you may be thinking, so how do we gain control of this? And it really is dependent upon each individual choices. And those choices are, do I wear a mask? Do I social distance? Do I stay home among my household members? Do I wash my hands? Do I avoid groups? Do I get a flu shot? Do I stay home if sick and get tested? And our choices really will play out in terms of, will we be able to keep students in receiving in-person learning? Will businesses be able to continue to stay open and meet their production goals? And will we be able to get to a point where our hospitals are not implementing surge plans? And ultimately, can we avoid people dying from COVID and having family and friends having to attend funerals? So with that, I will stop here and ask if there's questions that I could address.
Thank you, Joan. The one question that I would start out with is, do we know the healthcare systems and what capacity they're at, and how close are they to moving to emergency plans as far as capacity goes in their ICUs and their COVID units?
Yeah. Actually, that's part of the daily call. Is they actually review how many med-surg beds they have available, how many ICU beds they have available. Then they also review how many COVID med-surg and ICU beds they have available, and then their ability to take new patients, their ability to transfer out. The other thing they're also monitoring, and what's helping them control the surge, is how many elective procedures they're doing. So for some of the healthcare systems, it's a day-by-day decision in terms of what elective procedures they are carrying out. And that's one way to control it. You probably have also heard that the state did open a alternative care facility at down at the State Fair Park. And that was as a way to help relieve, and I think it was primarily more so targeted for the Fox Valley area because they are seeing increased pressures over us. And so that is also being monitored in terms of, is there a need to open an additional facility at some point in the Madison area? So it's something that the state is very aware of and is monitoring on a daily basis. And the information that is collected on a daily basis within each of the regions is then fed up to the state.
Okay, thank you.
So I would say our healthcare systems are strained, but they are definitely not breaking at this point.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board?
Chair Gibbs, Supervisor Fisher here.
Supervisor Fisher is recognized.
Thank you. Joan, just a very quick question for you. Right now, obviously, we have 3 large providers in our area for Aspirus, Ascension, and Marshfield Clinic. Are they all juggling the patient load similarly? Are we getting a surge in one of the particular providers, or is it fairly level from what you're seeing on the intakes?
I think it's fairly level, and I think, one of the things I do want to acknowledge is we're fortunate. We do have 3 major healthcare systems within our geographic boundaries here, and there's a total of 17 facilities when you look at their outlining facilities. Each system is, I think, looking within their own system in terms of how they can support one another, either with staffing or with transfers. And then there is definitely dialogue among systems as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Joan. And thank you for everything you and your staff are doing to help keep us safe.
Thank you.
Any other questions by the board? Well, Joan, there's no other questions. I want to, on behalf of the board, express my sincere thank you to you, your staff. Challenging times, to say the least, but you're doing a fantastic job, and at some point we'll be able to show our appreciation maybe a little better when we can actually have a meal or a celebration that we have some kind of closure to this. But thank you to your staff and my sincere appreciation for all that you do. So thank you for that, and thank you for your report.
Thank you. And I will sign off at this point then, and have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, Joan. Moving on to item B, presentation and reports under item 8, a report to the board on the investigation and action by executive committee of the clerk Trueblood. And that report is going to be provided by Corp Counsel Scott Corbett. Scott?
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to report to the board on the investigation in this case. I did earlier in the day send every member of the county board except Ms. Bizzuto, and I apologize for that. I did not have a Marathon County email for her yet, but everybody else should have received an email from me providing you with a copy of the investigation report, a copy of Mrs. Trueblood's response to the State Ethics Commission, a copy of her response to the Executive Committee when she was given an opportunity to do that, a copy of a joint statement that was entered into between Mrs. Trueblood and the Executive Committee, and also an email that was received after the action of the Executive Committee dismissing any complaint against Mrs. Trueblood that had been filed by the school board president. So I would ask you to review those documents. If you have any questions about them, I'd certainly be happy to answer those questions individually or at this time. I'm prepared to provide a summary regarding what's happened in this case and the process of investigation and the resolution that was adopted by the executive committee ultimately. The first thing I want to say is something that I repeatedly said to the executive committee, and that is this, that what has happened in this case does bear some similarities to the process that we went through with Brad Carger, the former administrator, back in 2016. But Mr. Carger's relationship to the board is fundamentally different than the relationship that the board has with a fellow elective officer. And Mrs. Trueblood is an elective officer of the Marathon County Board. What happened with respect to Mr. Carger was essentially a performance review for the purposes of continued employment by Marathon County. This is not a performance review. Ms. Trueblood, as an elective officer, is held to the same standard that every member of the county board would be held to as a fellow elected officer. The timeline of what has happened in this case began on July 27th when the Wausau School Board voted to begin the school year in a virtual format without any in-class learning. And Ms. Trueblood, along with Mrs. Trueblood, along with many other people, joined in a private Facebook group to talk about the results of that vote and the actions that they would take. One of the people on the posting suggested possible recall of the members of the school board. Mrs. Trueblood entered some of her own posts relative to that, and we'll get into that in a moment. And that happened on July 28th. On July 30th, those postings were published in the Wausau Pilot and Review. And the same day, the Marathon County Board Chair received an email from the president of the Wausau School Board requesting an investigation and other action by the Marathon County Board to address the contents of those postings. Within a week, on August 4th, the executive committee had a special meeting and they authorized an investigation into the postings and any other actions that may have been taken by Mrs. Trueblood. The scope of that investigation was to include the possibility of removal from office, the possibility of a violation of state ethics code, and the possibility of the applicability of the Marathon County core values and ethics policy to what had happened. The process that was agreed upon by the committee was to authorize me to employ an outside legal counsel to conduct the investigation. And I believe the reason for that was to make sure that the investigation was conducted in an unbiased way, either for Mrs. Trueblood or against her, but rather bring in a neutral third party to conduct that investigation. And that investigation has been completed. The process of that investigation included the investigator interviewing 18 different people regarding their perceptions concerning the posts and any other actions that they may have observed with respect to Mrs. Trueblood's conduct. They also reviewed county email that Mrs. Trueblood had posted. They also reviewed all county internet traffic with respect to the county clerk's office, and they also reviewed all the postings on that Facebook page. The conclusion of the investigation, and again, I refer you to the investigation report itself, was that Mrs. Trueblood's comments were made on personal time, on personal equipment, on a private Facebook group. The conclusion of the investigator was that there was no evidence to support a finding of cause for removal of Mrs. Trueblood from office. They also found no evidence to support a finding that there had been a violation of the state ethics code. The investigator did conclude that there was evidence to suggest or to support consideration by the board of a resolution of censure for violation of core values. Now, I'm going to talk about the actions and considerations of the executive committee, and certainly the executive committee can speak for itself with respect to the board, but I attended those meetings, and I can tell you what the executive committee considered. The executive committee considered the effect of those statements on the public and internal Marathon County operations. They considered the conclusion that the statements had undermined public confidence in the Marathon County election process, as well as confidence in the Marathon County Health Department. And they also considered that those statements had resulted in internal disruption of working relationships between the different departments in Marathon County, as well as Marathon County's relationship to the school board. But the committee also considered that these were statements and not actions. Again, the conclusion is that these were statements that were made on personal equipment, on personal time, and on a private Facebook page. I think they also considered, well, I'm sure they also considered, because again, I was present, they considered that all of this occurred within the environment of the COVID pandemic, which we've just, again, heard about. They considered that certainly emotions have been elevated by the existence of the pandemic itself. They considered that COVID was the cause of closing the schools, and that COVID was the cause for so many virtual meetings that have occurred, which are certainly not the best way of creating interaction. Although on a stormy night like this, maybe virtual meetings are maybe we've learned something. But those were the considerations of the committee, and they also considered that essentially, no matter what the county does with respect to the issue of possible censure, there was going to be a day after that. And Mrs. Trueblood is going to be the clerk for Marathon County. Those of us who lived through the experience with the county administrator know, and I can tell you that experience was, what was lost in that was the performance of the administrator with respect to the use of his title, the use of his Marathon County email, the fact that he participated for a long period of time in the planning of the demonstration that occurred, and that he was actually introduced on stage as a representative of Marathon County, what happened was there was a huge fight over whether or not people agreed with the position that he took. And I can tell you that there was a lot of discord, and that the aftermath of that was only put to right because of the personalities of the people that were involved. So I can tell you those were the considerations of the Executive Committee Marathon County leadership. What they determined to do on this occasion was to reason through this situation and to not elevate this matter any further, but to try to come together in an opportunity to issue a joint statement regarding the outcomes from this investigation and from the meetings that happened after that. And I'd like to read that joint statement if that would be all right with.
By all means, Scott, please.
All right. It's not too long. So it begins, joint statement regarding investigation of Marathon County Clerk Kim Trueblood. Whereas the Marathon County Executive Committee has conducted an investigation surrounding Facebook posts made by Marathon County Clerk Kim Trueblood on or about July 28, 2020, following the vote of the Wausau Board of Elections School Board to start the 2020-2021 school year in a virtual format because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And whereas Mrs. Trueblood is the parent of 3 children, 2 of whom are currently enrolled in the Wausau School District, and she and a significant number of other parents were upset by and disagreed with the decision of the school board to have no in-class learning offered at the commencement of the school year. And whereas Mrs. Trueblood confirmed that she posted multiple messages on a private Facebook group called, quote, Parents for Wausau Schools Reopening, unquote, critical of the school board's decision. One post made in response to discussion of possible recall of some of the members of the school board who had voted to start the school year in a virtual format reads as follows, quote, school board elections are in the spring, period. Due to my position, I have to be very careful with what I support publicly, but I can get info and do anything behind the scenes, unquote. And whereas Mrs. Trueblood made another post critical of the Marathon County Health Officer, Joan Toyer, who is a fellow department head. That post was made in response to questions from the Facebook group members regarding who was responsible for providing information to the school board regarding potential spread of COVID-19 that formed the rationale for their vote. The post reads, quote, Health officer is Joan Toyer. Joan, and then it gives her email address. She quotes CDC stuff like it's the Bible. Flood her with emails like another member of the Facebook group member said, facts, 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 unquote. And whereas the Marathon County has adopted core values of service, quality, integrity, shared purpose, diversity, and stewardship of resources. These core values are the larger concepts that set forth the aspirations of Marathon County government as a whole. The county's ethics policy is the core values put into practice as they apply to day-to-day operations. And whereas public confidence in the integrity of the local election process is critically important to the continued functioning of American democracy. And whereas the investigation concluded that Mrs. Trueblood's posts were made on personal time on her personal equipment in a private Facebook group. Furthermore, the investigation concluded there was no evidence that Mrs. Trueblood has committed misconduct in office or that any other basis for removal from office exists, or that there has been a violation of state ethics code for local government officials. However, The investigation has concluded that there is a basis for possible censure of Mrs. Trueblood for violation of the Marathon County core values and Marathon County's ethics policy. And whereas the Executive Committee and Mrs. Trueblood recognize that censure will have little practical effect under the circumstances and may cause lasting damage to Marathon County's working culture. Mrs. Trueblood is an elective officer of the county who is running unopposed for a 4-year term. Furthermore, the parties are sensitive to the fact that First Amendment rights are implicated in this matter related to Mrs. Trueblood's posts. However, the Executive Committee must hold itself and all elective officers to its own core values and standards of ethics, including integrity and shared purpose, in the name of the residents that they are elected to represent. Now, therefore, the parties wishing to resolve this issue and move forward agree to the following joint statement. 1, although the Executive Committee has not made any findings of wrongdoing by Mrs. Trueblood understands and has come to appreciate that despite her intentions, the words she chose to use that she could, quote, do anything behind the scenes, unquote, could have been interpreted by other people in a manner that goes beyond only school board elections and could cause them to question the integrity of any elections in Marathon County with which her office is involved. 2, likewise, Mrs. Trueblood understands that the words she chose to use in her post with respect to Marathon County Health Officer could cause harm to the ability of that department to perform its duties in an environment where those responsibilities are already extremely difficult and demanding during a pandemic. She did realize this comment was not supportive of the health officer and deleted the post shortly after making it. 3, Mrs. Trueblood acknowledges and understands that she is subject to the same core values and standards of ethics that the board applies to itself and that govern the operations of all departments of Marathon County every day. 4, Mrs. Trueblood takes full responsibility for the statements she has made and any negative repercussions that may have resulted, such as a loss of faith by some members of the public in the fairness and impartiality of Marathon County elections, or detriment to the ability of the health department to stem the spread of COVID-19 within Marathon County. The Executive Committee recognizes, paragraph 5. The Executive Committee recognizes that the posts made by Mrs. Trueblood and the feelings expressed occurred in the heat of the moment following the disappointment of and frustration with the school board vote and the manner in which the school board held its meeting and took the vote in a virtual format. 6, the Executive Committee recognizes that Mrs. Trueblood's intent in her post was to express her willingness to help obtain information to assist other members of the private Facebook group to learn the steps necessary to petition and campaign for a recall of specific board members. She did not intend for the posts to reflect negatively on her office or Marathon County. 7, the Executive Committee and Mrs. Trueblood pledged to work together going forward to maintain public confidence in the county's election process and the internal unity of purpose of the diverse departments administering programs within Marathon County government. Both the Executive Committee and Mrs. Trueblood agree that the above recitals and terms shall fully and finally conclude the complaint and subsequent investigation. Approved by Kim Trueblood and Marathon County Executive Committee, October 8, 2020. So that is the result of the investigation.
Well, thank you, Scott. Is there any questions by the board? Supervisor Krause.
Thank you, Board Chair. I would like to ask, what was the cost in doing this investigation?
The cost of the investigation, the most recent, I was authorized to spend up to $25,000 with respect to the initial agreement for the investigation. The last invoice that I received was just to that, but I have not received the final billing.
Any other? Supervisor Krause?
Yes, and I would like to ask, what fund does this money come from, or where does it come from?
This actually does come from a fund that is available to my office for for obtaining outside counsel. I would just say that fortunately, there had been no other reasons for me to seek outside counsel this year, and so that fund was available.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, we will move on to item C, consent agenda. Items C9 through items C12B. What is your pleasure? Motion by Vice Chair McEwen and second by Supervisor Rosenberg. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda, items C9 through C12B? Seeing no discussion, we'll move to vote. All those in favor of approval of items C9 through C12B, the consent agenda, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item D, appointment D13, the Marathon County Treasurer. What is your pleasure? Motion by Vice Chair McEwen and second by Supervisor Rosenberg. Is there any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. All those in favor of the appointment to the Marathon County Treasurer's position, item D13, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. And resolutions, item E from the Executive Committee, item E14, a resolution commemorating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, Resolution 62-20. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Krause.
I'd like to make a motion to accept this resolution.
Motion is made. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Rosenberg. Is there any discussion? Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Butke is recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just found one thing in here in the first paragraph. The last line of reference says 26 million women voted in the 1922 presidential election. There was not a presidential election 1922. I believe that is supposed to read 1920.
Is there a motion? Is there a motion to amend?
I'll make that motion.
Supervisor Butke with a motion to amend the paragraph to read the 1920 election instead of the 1922 presidential election. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Krause. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment to change the paragraph to read that the 1920 presidential election instead of the 1922 presidential election, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Any discussion on the resolution as amended?
Can I see it, please?
Any discussion on the motion as amended? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. The resolution commemorating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment as amended. All those in favor of the motion to approve signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. And we will move on to announcements and/or requests. Just another reminder from the clerk. If you are in the courthouse, please stop by the clerk's office and check your mailbox. There are some of the mailboxes that are getting fairly full. Also, an announcement from the Eastern Towns Chairman and the Western Towns Chairman. The Eastern Towns Association meeting scheduled for this Thursday has been canceled, along with the Western Towns Association meeting next Thursday, a week from this Thursday, has been canceled. Any other announcements and/or requests?
Mr. Chairman,
And
Supervisor Lamont,
Supervisor Lamont, go ahead. You're recognized.
I missed the roll call due to technical difficulties, but I've been on the phone listening to the meeting.
We already had you marked as present after we noted the
Okay, thank you.
technical difficulties. Thank you. Any other announcements?
Supervisor Schley.
Supervisor Schley is recognized.
Yes, just wanted to mention that the week of October 18th, 24th is Forest Products Week in Wisconsin. And a couple little highlights. Forest products, which are produced in the state of Wisconsin, bring in approximately $24 billion annually to the state. And there are approximately 63,000 jobs in the state of Wisconsin, and they're related to wood products. And in 7 of the counties in the state of Wisconsin, forestry is the #1 employer. And they have a payroll of $4.2 billion. And there is approximately 17 million acres of forest in Wisconsin. 31% is owned by local and federal and state governments, and 57% is owned by private individuals. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other announcements and/or requests? Any other announcements and/or requests? Seeing none, I'll take item number 16, a motion to adjourn. Supervisor Rosenberg with the motion. Any second?
Second by Supervisor Gottering.
Supervisor Gunnering with the second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We stand adjourned.